Welcome everyone from wherever in the world you are joining us. My name is Jeannie Park. I'm a member of the Harvard College class of 1983 and the president of the Harvard Asian American Alumni Alliance, or H4A, as we call it for short. I'm very pleased to be here today as a representative of the 4 alumni shared interest groups that are co-sponsoring today's conversation with Dr. Sherri Charleston. Along with H4A, the Harvard Black Alumni Society, the Harvard Latino Alumni Alliance, and the Native American Alumni of Harvard University have been working together under the banner of Unity webinars to create programs this year that put a spotlight on Harvard alumni of color and issues that we care about, which will lead up to a virtual Unity weekend this September. Our Unity partnership has been one of the more meaningful experiences of my nearly 40 years as an alum. But I also want to thank the many other alumni organizations, both official and unofficial ones, and too many to name, that have stood in support and solidarity with us and have often been out in front themselves in advocating at Harvard on issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial justice. The amount of volunteer time and energy that all our alumni members, including many of you here today, have devoted to this work shows how much we care about our alma mater and how we look to Harvard for leadership in this too often confounding world. Today, we will hear from the person who serves as the university's point person on these matters. I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr. Sherri Ann Charleston, who is the inaugural Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Harvard University, working across all the university schools. She is one of the nation's leading experts in diversity and higher education. Dr. Charleston is a historian trained in US history with a focus on race, women, gender, citizenship, and the law, and an attorney with a specialization in constitutional and employment law. Most recently, she served as the Assistant Vice Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Chief Affirmative Action Officer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she was responsible for evaluating progress toward the goals of a campus-wide strategic diversity plan. During her leadership, she also oversaw the Office of Employee Disability Resources and undergraduate scholarship programs focused on recruiting and retaining students from historically underrepresented communities. Dr. Charleston began her role at Harvard last August, but because of the pandemic has yet to move to Cambridge and is coming up to us today from frigid temperatures in Wisconsin. Still, she has immersed herself deeply in the Harvard community and culture and will be sharing with us today some of what she has learned so far and her plans going forward. If you have a question for Dr. Charleston, please put it in the Q&A box found at the bottom of your screen. Now let's give a virtual but heartfelt welcome to Dr. Charleston. Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jeannie. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and really for the opportunity to be here with you all. So to all the members of the team who've worked behind the scenes, the HAA team who've pulled this together, it really is just a pleasure. And to all of the Unity Committee chairs, it's wonderful to be here with you all, and all of the members. It's wonderful to have an opportunity to talk with you all. I never turn down an opportunity to engage with experts, particularly those who understand this great institution that we find ourselves in. So I am going to share a few thoughts with you all today and give you a sense of what I've been working on since I've gotten to campus. I am now officially in my 7th month. I can hardly believe that. Time is really truly flying, but I will give you a sort of a sneak peek, a preliminary sense of what I've been discovering and what we've been finding, and give you a sense of my thinking on it, and hopefully, most importantly, get some insights from you all about how we can build this institution into the place that we know that we want it to be. So I'm going to share my screen. And as I mentioned, we're just going to spend some time talking a little bit about what we mean by inclusive excellence here at Harvard. I'll talk a little bit about the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, which is the office that I lead. And then I'll talk a little bit about where we are in our DIB journey. So I've shared this framework in other places, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share it here because I think it gives us a clearer sense, a somewhat clear sense of what we mean by inclusive excellence at Harvard. So a little about my background for context. As Jeannie mentioned, I'm a historian. My work is in late 19th, early 20th century US history. And so you will never, well, I won't say never, you will be hard pressed to find a problem that I don't approach from a historical framework in that sort of way. I'm also an attorney and I did work at the University of Wisconsin in the compliance area, focusing on affirmative action. And so my sense of sort of the journey towards inclusive excellence, which to be clear is definitely a journey and a place that we are striving to get to, it's our destination, is really predicated on this idea that it's a framework that is comprised of a network of strategies that have been built up over time. And so really when we talk about inclusive excellence, the story really begins with the timing after Brown v. Board, where we start to focus more on compositional diversity in education and then later, of course, in higher ed. And thinking about diversity as a sort of a compositional factor, the ways in which the full gamut of difference eventually becomes included in this framework is a longer story about the progression over time. But when we talk about diversity, we're really talking about composition. Who are the people who make up our environments? We then see more of a focus on equity. So what does it mean to have more of a focus on thinking about equitable treatment between members of the community now that we have compositional diversity in place? Many of us, are familiar with the sort of concepts of inclusion and belonging. Those of us who have been working in the field relative to diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education recognize that over time, we've started to talk more about inclusion as a primary factor in the work that we're doing relative to DEI on our college campuses. Some of us perhaps experienced this experientially as students. As we saw multicultural centers emerge, we see a focus on places like third world centers emerging across college campuses in the 70s and 80s. But that is sort of now morphed into what we are calling an increased focus on belonging. So it's not enough to have a diverse community. It's not enough to have equitable experiences for members of that community. And it's not enough to focus on how we can make people feel included. And sometimes inclusion is certainly perhaps not even enough because we don't want people to just feel as if they are included or invited to the party and invited to dance, but we want people to feel as if they are organizers of the party, that they are citizens with all of us, and that they have a shared sense of the way that they contribute to our mission and our vision as institutions. I think over the course of the last few years, and certainly within the context of the current moment, the killing of George Floyd, we see a renewed or perhaps new attention to anti-racism and thinking about how we can focus on very clear and tangible ways that we can create equitable environments by focusing on thinking about how we intentionally roll back systemic or systematic or infrastructural aspects of our culture, our system, our infrastructure that disproportionately creates whether intentionally or unintentionally racist outcomes, behaviors, or supports those. So when we talk about what inclusive excellence is at Harvard, we think of it as a framework, one that unifies our network of anti-racism, inclusion, belonging, equity, diversity initiatives, and allows us to really think about what it means to aspire to achieve inclusive excellence. So we're moving beyond the goal of just talking about non-discrimination. What we're talking about is how can we fully embrace the full value that flows from bringing diversity into an environment, and then how do we use that to transform our environment? And we recognize that this is a journey. This is a path that we are on. And I will say one that I am very pleased to see such a groundswell of work has already been done in this area. And that's been one of the things that's been great about being at Harvard, is being able to engage with a community of people who are already so deeply entrenched in doing this work. So in a nutshell, when we talk about the work that we're doing, it is really what we would say the diversity and equity pieces are really about composition. But inclusion, belonging, anti-racism, those require action. And we are in this stage now where we are catalyzing action in order to create the ideal environment, a target environment, one where we know that everyone can thrive. So now I have a question for you, and I'm going to enlist my partners here to help us with a poll, because I would love to get a sense from you all. These webinars are sometimes don't allow us to engage the way we would like to. And so humor me and give me a sense of whether you felt like you belonged while you were at Harvard. And we'll give it a moment for the questions to come in. I see the answers to come in. I see that number going up. So this is great. So, and I'm actually very, very pleased to see this. So many of us felt like we had a good experience to the extent that we felt like we belonged here on campus. So that's wonderful. I'm going to ask another question. Put another way, to give you a sense of my thinking on this. So if I was to ask the question this way, and we're gonna create an opportunity for you all to respond to this question in the chat feature, which typically is not open, but we'll open it for this. For those of you who either said you strongly disagreed or you disagreed, or even for those who said that they did feel like they belonged, but maybe did not strongly agree that they felt as if they belonged. What could Harvard have done, or how could your school have increased your sense of inclusion and belonging? And this is just an open-ended question. Diversity in staff. Don't think Harvard could have done much. More small groups and mentoring. Better connection from alumni. I think these are great. Professors, faculty with more explicit discussion of racism, tenured faculty of color. Support for lesbians. So these are fantastic. Have ethnic studies, fantastic. Deal with finals clubs better, require them to be co-ed. Mentorship, more cultural activities. Promotion of more of a culture of care. So please I'm going to confess that selfishly, I was also looking forward to this conversation because I was hoping to glean some insights from you all. And really, when we think about the work of creating a more diverse, inclusive environment, it's for all of it's many of the strategies, many of the things that you all have identified. So please continue to fill in the chat. I would love to be able to read these afterwards, but I'm going to talk a little bit about my approach to the work so that you all get a sense of my thinking. There are really 4 pillars or components of the work that inform my approach. The first is research-informed and asset-based approaches. So thinking about what we already know to be best practices in the field. Often my colleagues who are on this call who have had this conversation, who I've had this conversation with before, we sort of, I always say that the hard part is not knowing what to do. It's really trying to identify the prioritization of our strategy. And so part of what we do is to start the process by thinking about what are the things that we're really good at and how can we leverage those? How can we identify what another colleague of mine from the University of Wisconsin calls pockets of excellence? How can we identify those? And how can we use that sort of asset-based approach to make sure that we are consistently inventorying and capitalizing on existing strengths. The second thing is really organizational excellence. And so thinking about how we build an infrastructure for transformation. This means how are we going to operate within a distributed leadership model? How are we going to think about organizing ourselves so that we're able to move effectively using targeted initiatives, for example? How can we coordinate our efforts? And then how can we make sure that we have the infrastructure in place relative to resources, responsibilities, and requirements to make sure that we have an infrastructure for sustained institutional transformation poised and ready to go? With those 2 pieces in mind, the third piece then really becomes the most important, which is campus and community engagement. And so thinking about how we identify not only the community that we have internal to the university, but also the work that we have to do to think about our external partnerships. And, in the case of a university like Harvard, our backyard, our community is really much bigger than Cambridge. It's the country, it's the world, if you will. And so our responsibility is to think about how can we identify areas where we have existing strength and how we can use those existing strengths to benefit the broader world. You put those 3 pillars together and they really feed and factor into the 4th one, which is inclusive excellence. And inclusive excellence is really a focus on the recruitment, the retention, and engagement of a highly diverse, highly qualified group of people and exceptional talent and individuals to make sure that we are maximizing all of the benefits that come from having a diverse environment. And I will not spend time today sort of preaching, hopefully, to the choir in some ways about all of the benefits of diversity and the reasons why it matters. But I will just say that when we're talking about why we do this work, there are moral reasons, certainly because it's the right thing to do. There are certainly, I think, practical reasons as well. We want to make sure that we are engaging the talent that we so deeply value in our community. And we know that there are sort of practical and business implications for this, that corporations, universities that are comprised of more diverse teams have a greater capacity to solve problems creatively. So I won't go into I said I won't go down the rabbit hole, and I won't, but I felt the need that I wanted to make sure that that we were on the same page there. So what have I been discovering? So I mentioned that I've been on campus for approximately 7 months now. In my first 4 months, I spent some time doing lots of engagements where I was getting to know members of the community, having one-on-one conversations, small and big, large group settings, and try to identify, in line with a sort of asset-based inventorying approach, what were the things that the community really wanted us to focus on. And so there were really 4 areas. One is leadership. And so we know on campus Harvard is an incredibly decentralized institution, and decentralization is really not quite the right word for it. Someone suggested to me that when we talk about decentralization at Harvard, Harvard is more like a set of independent fiefdoms connected by a common parking problem. And I thought that actually was a fairly good description of the campus thus far. In terms of what I'm discovering. And, but that being said, it's a unique need and a unique opportunity for us to think about how we leverage the work that's been developed on the local level. But this is actually not a bad thing necessarily. I have often joked that we have an opportunity to test out the work that we've been discovering through our research in localized environments. And so if anybody has the right tools to be successful in this area, it's really Harvard. We have 12 different petri dishes that we can work in, and we can test out the best thinking in the field. And so my job is to think about how we unify those efforts in a way that moves us towards a consistent strategy over time so that we can measure our progress. It's no surprise, many of you noted it in the chat, diversity of faculty, staff, and students. So continuing to focus on compositional factors and thinking about equitable experiences between them. Third, safe spaces. So safe spaces for learning, teaching, co-curricular programming. This included everything from thinking about how we focus more on creating inclusive classroom environments, to how we partner with our colleagues who are doing student affairs work to think about co-curricular pieces. And then finally, this focus on cultural change. So some things are already underway there. So the committee to articulate principles on renaming, the work that we're doing around Harvard and the legacy of slavery. These are sort of deep cultural pieces that go to the heart of sort of who we are as an institution that we'll have to continue to examine. So I'll talk just a little bit about our approach to the work, and then I'll say a few more words and then we'll open it up for discussion. But when we talk about our strategic approach towards diversity, inclusion, and belonging that's really coordinated through my office, I report directly to President Bacow, and I've been charged with really helping to convene the schools, to convene our institutional partners, to facilitate collaborations so that we can move in a more strategic direction. I really function oftentimes as I say, I'm more of a convener in chief. I am really here to help facilitate and to help us to create the networks that we really need in order to move our institution forward. We are catalysts. So, really part of our work is to leverage opportunities to drive innovative change on campus. We're really proud right now. We just launched this year's round of funding for our Harvard Culture Lab Innovation Fund, which is a key way that we partner with members of the community to develop really ingenious ideas that can help us to achieve our shared goals. We build community. We function as a consultant, but ultimately, our job is to work with the schools and the units and to fill holes, to create more of a sense of a unified agenda across campus. And that's what we do in a nutshell. So I often like to highlight something that another colleague, Dr. Damon Williams, shared in his book on strategic diversity leadership. It's this metaphor of the cheetah versus the wolf. I'm an animal lover, and sometimes you will catch me watching Animal Planet or whatever is happening on television. And the idea is that there are two approaches to leadership for leading for change. And it's an illustrative way, I think, to give us a sense of what it is that we're trying to achieve here. If you look at the cheetah are among the world's most prolific hunters, right? They can reach top speeds fairly easily. They can get in excess of 70 miles per hour, but they live relatively solitary lives. They hunt alone, perhaps in pairs. But wolves lie in packs of about 30, and they can move relentlessly for days on end across nearly any terrain, and they work collectively. And in doing so, because they're in much larger teams, they can actually take down much larger prey. What I think is really interesting, they are often famous for trailing behind a large herd for days, and then they weaken them slowly, and then they execute an in-game strategy. So you get where I'm going here. Part of our work is to think about how we, in a decentralized environment, work collectively. How can we not be so responsive to crisis moments? We can be prepared for them through proactive measures in addition to reactive measures. But what does it look like to create a proactive diversity strategy? How can we act collectively by leveraging all the different initiatives that we have across campus? How can we build a clear diversity infrastructure? This is something that we've been working very intentionally towards on campus, with all of our schools partnering with us to identify diversity and inclusion and belonging leads, whether they're associate deans, assistant deans, or chief diversity and inclusion officers in the school. And then we are then taking that group and trying to engage in big picture thinking, moving away from just ad hoc things to thinking about how we figure out a way to point our arrow in a way that allows us to act in a consistent long-term way. For me, I started my remarks by saying that I'm a historian, so I'm always thinking about change over time. And so we are embarking on a journey here. One that we imagine will not be easy. It's not one that will happen overnight. It will require us to be consistent, to engage over the course of the next 5 to 10 years in evaluating our progress over time, and then continuing to make collective progress together. So I'll share just one thing that I've been sharing across campus so that you all get a sense of it. And it's available on our website, the self-guided planning tool for inclusive excellence. And we've been asking our campus partners to start to think about where we are as a campus, right? How are we moving through the various phases of DIB? And remember, I said inclusive excellence is a journey. It's a place that we're striving towards. And, you know, I would say that as a campus overall, we have our starts and stops. And we are perhaps uneven in some ways because of our decentralized structure, but we are moving from a growth stage where we started the discussion about setting priorities. And we're starting the process of building capacity, starting the process of developing investment around these initiatives, and then moving from there to mature. And so we are on a path. I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to share with you all a sense of where we are and how we are progressing. And I'm going to stop there because I would like us to spend some time, if we can, having a bit of a conversation, and so that I can hear from you all things that you're particularly interested in talking about. And so, Jeannie and the HAA team, I will invite you all back, and maybe we continue to have this conversation together.
Sherri, thank you so much for this presentation. This is Chris Sawacki from the Harvard Alumni Association. I'm going to be providing you questions that we've received both here in our Q&A section, as well as some in advance. Our first question to you is, what are some of the wins you've seen in your short tenure so far?
What are some of the wins? So very short tenure. 7 months, but I am very proud of some of the work that we've, been able to do. I will say this, and I said this at the beginning, that there was already a groundswell of work that was happening across campus. And so we saw when I first got there, such energy and excitement from across campus to really engage in these conversations. And so that is actually in and of itself a sizable win, because many institutions, you spend so much time doing the work of breaking up the ground to get the community ready to start engaging around these principles. So we were already ready to go. The campus, has embarked on a process of creating a anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, anti-bullying policy, which is something that I'm leading up one of the working groups. And we hope to move towards having a fuller discussion that will be campus-wide on the development of a uniform policy and set of procedures. And I think that'll be a huge win for our campus. We've seen lots of wonderful work that's happened around the HUPD, so the hiring of a new police chief for the police department. Lots of great work that's happening there to create an engaged community model that will really allow us to think more intentionally about what policing needs to look like on campus. Our office, because of that little thing called the election, we actually decided to lean into it. Many of us, and I'm sure many of you who worked in higher education or anywhere over the course of the past few election cycles, recognize that these are very fraught times on our college campuses. And so we leaned into that discussion by launching a community dialogue series. And so we had Governor Deval Patrick, an alum of the college, to come and speak to us about leadership and leading across difference. And then we hosted Ted Olson and David Boyce, the two attorneys who argued Bush v. Gore, for a retrospective look at Bush v. Gore at 20. And this was all in the first semester. And so really excited about the great work that we're doing, and just really excited to see more to come.
Excellent. Our next question asks, what concrete actions is Harvard taking to be inclusive of Asian American issues, particularly lack of representation at the leadership level?
Yeah, so great question. So this is I want to point to something that's close to the ground, and then something that's a little bit more macro level. Some of you may know that there has been an increase in anti-Asian American violence that we have seen happening not only on our campuses, but really across the country. And in many ways, we saw that being, I would say, fueled and certainly stoked by the intersecting pandemic that we have relative to COVID-19. So we decided, for a number of reasons, that we were going to start hosting affinity group gatherings. And so one of the things that we've been doing is hosting an affinity group space, which we'll do next week as well, for members of the community who are Asian American, because we really wanted to grapple with this together as a community and to provide support. And so we've been really intentional about partnering with counseling and mental health services, our university chaplains, behavioral health, to think about how we can provide community support in a non-clinical setting for members of our community. I stress that because it's a very, very key component of the work that we have to do relative to anti-racism, to make sure that we are creating space for these kinds of conversations, but also, more importantly, providing space and support for members of our community. But then there's the other side of it. The other side of it is the place where we spend time intentionally focusing on what it looks like to do inclusive hiring. So myself, along with our Vice President for Human Resources, Marilyn Hasselman, have launched an inclusive hiring initiative where we can really lead the campus towards thinking about how we should be more intentional, or how we can be more intentional relative to diversity and inclusion throughout our hiring process. The next phase of that is really to start focusing on inclusion in the promotion and retention pieces, because this is a key factor in our ability to be successful. We don't just want to recruit people to the institution, we want to keep people at the institution. And so this is, really part of the work, and thinking about this across spaces then becomes a key function of the work that our office does to make sure that we're monitoring progress over time.
Wonderful. A question that just came into our Q&A box. The person says, what I've noticed in these types of presentations, the audience tends to be the choir. How do you reach out to the people who really need to hear what you're saying?
That is a great question, so you're right. A lot of times the audience is the choir. Sometimes we can use a little fine tuning of our pitch, but we are the choir for the most part. I have said this, across campus, equity, diversity, and inclusion and belonging is everyone's responsibility because it benefits all of us. And I think that we make a mistake sometimes when we talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging as if we are only trying to create space for people of color, or only trying to create space for people with disabilities or other marginalized identities. That is not what we're doing. We are creating an environment where all, and all just translates to all, right? That where all of us can thrive and where all of us feel a sense of belonging. And so our job is not just to focus on what we would consider to be subsets of the population. Our job is to focus on the entirety of our community. And this becomes really, really important because oftentimes members of our community don't see themselves in it, and they think that we're talking about some other people. But no, we're talking about everyone. We're talking about, let's say, I always use the example of universal design. I'm a woman who is older and who has a penchant for wearing high heels. And that penchant for high heels has made it so that occasionally as I'm walking up steps, I hear some popping and cracking, and I would benefit from a ramp or some other way of entering into the building just as much as anyone else. So if we just start thinking about universal design, there are ways that increasing the universality of accessibility impacts and affects all of us, so we have to engage people. We have to bring people along, and we have to help them understand that this is really about creating an environment where everyone has an opportunity to be engaged, and that oftentimes benefits us the most.
One of the questions that's come in, could you tell us how you will maintain a healthy tension of safe space and intellectual liberty of thought and the substantive sharing of ideas without a systemic bias of offense that is arising in the American culture?
So Chris, say that question one more time, please.
Absolutely. So how will you maintain a healthy tension of safe space and intellectual liberty of thought and the substantive sharing of ideas without a systemic bias of offense that is arising in American culture? I think that they're referring to like cancel culture.
Yes, gotcha. So, this is a wonderful question. So we leaned into this space with the community dialogue series, and this is something that we were intentionally thinking about with our colleagues over at the law school, the Kennedy School, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences in particular, because these are issues that are really important to their communities as well. And, we started with trying to model what it looks like to have productive dialogue across difference. And we launched an inclusive dialogue toolkit that we hope people will download if we were on campus. We'd spread them around everywhere because we really want to be intentional about thinking about what it looks like to call people in rather than just calling people out. Now, I say that because I have to admit my own biases here. I call it occupational hazard as an attorney, I generally tend to think that if we engage in rigorous discourse, including dissent, then that allows us to engage. I think, more fully in search for what we hope to be the ultimate truth. And I generally do think that good arguments on both sides create the best friction, and that allows us to see things a little bit more clearly. What we have said, though, is that having rigorous dissent and debate has to go two ways. It's first thing. It's conversation, and it has to be a dialogue between two people. It also needs to ascribe to what we would say are the community standards and community norms. And so we have not been afraid to point that out because it's important for us to make sure that we are in line with those sorts of principles. And, but here's the other piece. That is not the same thing as allowing we want to have rigorous dissent. We don't at the same time want to lose sight of the fact that there can be racist, hateful language that we, for any number of reasons, may want to be very clear that for any number of reasons that is abhorrent to our values. And so I think we can do those two things at the same time. We can be very clear about what it is that we condemn, at the same time that we can be very, very clear about what it is that we value. And we have maintained that we value our ability to rigorously disagree on things with both rigor and I think passion.
All right, thank you. So the next question, we've seen a lot of these, so we've kind of combined it into one. So Harvard has been a revolving door for ethnic studies scholars and faculty of color. Some have been denied tenure outright, some have been felt pushed out, and some have gone to other universities that have valued their academic, teaching, and mentoring contributions in a way that Harvard does not. How can Harvard address these hiring and retention problems?
Yeah, so, I think Harvard, we have an embarrassment of riches, and we have faculty who are the best in the world. They are highly sought after. They are oftentimes recruited to other places to lead initiatives, to move into the administration. We see our faculty going all over the world to do really amazing things. And so oftentimes, our biggest competition, it's not that the institution itself is always so lacking. Oftentimes, and I just want to highlight this because I think it matters, that our faculty are going to do amazing, wonderful things in other places, which we tout. That said, we are really focused, and it's been a sort of a renewed area of focus to think about how we can make sure that we are recruiting diverse and exceptional talent. And we've seen this, I think, across the schools to some extent, sometimes more unevenly than others, given the number of constraints that our schools are under. But I'll give you an example. Dean Claudine Gay, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, has launched an ethnic studies search. And that's a huge thing. And it's courageous leadership on her part, and something that we're really excited to see what this will birth for the institution and for the university and the schools. But the recruitment piece is not enough. That is true. We have to do more to make sure that we are creating environments where our faculty feel valued and feel included and continue to feel as if they can thrive. And this is an area that I think that we all know that we have to do better. And so it's one that we're being really intentional about and focused on.
Thank you. Someone in the audience wants to know, although you may have inherited this, can you explain the logo for Harvard Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging?
Can I explain the logo? So I did inherit it. It was here before me, and we have chosen to find colors that emphasize creativity and that spark a sense of ingenuity. And so one of the members of our team helped to design that logo, and it's one that we have been utilizing ever since.
Wonderful. This question is asking, how are the graduate schools involved, particularly the business, law, and medical schools, with the work of your office and yourself?
So, so I mentioned that we spend a lot of time working collaboratively with the schools. And I spoke a little bit about this in my presentation, that many of our schools now have dedicated diversity, inclusion, and belonging leaders, whether they're associate deans, assistant deans. Some have also the title of chief diversity officer for their school. And so we work quite closely together. We have a diversity, inclusion, and belonging council that meets monthly. We meet periodically to strategize and collaborate on initiatives. We rolled out a series of events around MLK Day that were connected across the schools. And we are working to try to be much more intentional about creating a network of opportunity. I want to say this because there's a sort of a follow-up to the last point I was making about faculty and sort of creating an inclusive working and learning environment. Here's what we know. We know that it's not enough to just recruit stellar individuals into a university. Our job is to create opportunities for there to be intellectual collaboration, if it's of interest, to create communities for our scholars, our faculty, our staff, our students, our postdocs to be able to engage with one another. And so part of the work of our office is to think about how we start to break down those silos to create more opportunity for collaboration. One of the best things that we have as an asset is our ability to utilize the community of the university to make this a place where we are figuring out a way to engage our faculty, to engage our staff, to engage our students in the actual work and the mission of the university. And in doing so, we think that that renewed focus will also have the benefit of improving our chances of continuing to retain some of the best minds and also citizens of our community that we have. And so one of the things, my point is that one of the things that we're working on is thinking about how we can create those collaborations much better between our Central Harvard community, our Longwood campus, and the various campuses around.
All right. Our next question is, so many of the Harvard alumni who are out there are trying to begin the work of DEIB earlier than college, at high schools and even elementary schools. Do you have any recommendations you can pass on how to get those efforts started earlier than starting at college?
So if I'm understanding the question, I think it's about how do we create space for the work to happen with our students? So let me take a stab at that. I think that one way that we're starting to think about this and approaching this is thinking about what we want to see for our students. Students are accepted into the university, and we are usually sure that they are going to contribute to the community and to use their degree in the world in some way, right? This is what happens when we admit students in any institution of higher education, right? And so we're always thinking about what it means to equip students to serve or to be in the world that they are going to inhabit. And so I have often found as an educator personally that any knowledge I gain or any knowledge I'm trying to convey is only relevant to the audience if they actually feel like it's going to benefit them in some way. And I think that our students, even elementary school students, middle school students, high school students, can be actively engaged in the process of thinking about what it looks like to prepare them for an increasingly diverse world. And I mean that actually from a perspective of equity, right? That we're not just talking about preparing students who might be more affluent or who might come from more homogeneous areas to be able to go out into more diverse spaces. I think that across the board, we see high levels of stratification in schooling, from public school to private school. And I think there are plenty of opportunities for us to think about engaging students in the work of thinking about a world that is beyond their immediate community. And I think the earlier that engagement process starts, the easier it makes the work long-term for us as we continue to think about moving through the world with a sense really of cultural humility, that we are certainly a part of a much bigger interconnected world than we often take credit for, or take account of rather.
So tying into something you just mentioned about affluence, are there any new initiatives geared towards the disproportionate effect the pandemic and distance learning has had on our first-gen low-income students?
Yes, before I arrived on campus, I know that there was a lot of work done to try to make sure that students were not experiencing displacement because of the pandemic in a way that was particularly detrimental for many members of our student population who were low income. I think that there's always more work to be done. And we are able to see, sometimes we're not able to see the nuances of that when we look at a macro level, partly because we are looking at things in the aggregate. And so part of the work that we did relative to the community spaces that I mentioned earlier was to try to create space for students to be able to engage with us, even virtually, to talk about some of the experiences that they were facing due to isolation, thinking about how we could create community even in a digital space to get a closer grasp on that work. And I know that, to their credit, many of the houses, and I'm thinking about undergraduate students in particularly, have continued to have virtual engagement with students who would have ordinarily been assigned to that house or have been a resident in that house, even though they're not there, in an effort to try to make sure that we're keeping tabs on students and making sure that they're supported in any way that we need them to be.
All right. Next question. It's actually a two-part question. So first question is, how do you define allyship within the structure that you are defining? And what are some of the actions that can be established to promote allyship throughout the university in different constituencies, from students to faculty or staff?
So, I'll actually start where I left off, which is to talk about the community spaces. We launched the community spaces this year because we were thinking about responding to the multiple pandemics that we're facing at the same time. Included in that was a focus on an understanding that we were facing a moment of heightened unrest relative to racial justice, and recognizing that that was taking a toll on many members of our community. And then there were also many members of our community who wanted to know how to show up and how to support members of the community who might be other members of the community who might be directly affected. And so we used that as an opportunity to really hold a space for allies. We're also building out a diversity, inclusion, and belonging academy in partnership with HR, which will be a set of courses that we started as part of another sort of pilot initiative, and now have rolled into this this longer 6-session course that will allow members of our community to dig into diversity, inclusion, belonging concepts, like allyship is actually one of them. And so it'll give the group an opportunity to really engage and think about, in a very structured fashion, what does it mean to serve as an ally for a person who may also be a part of a marginalized population or an underrepresented group in some way. And so we're trying to, we've tried to build in experiences as we've gone along to think about this. We've also tried to build in organizational learning opportunities for us as a campus that we're working to roll out in the next year or so, that'll give us more of a grounding in what it means to create a culture around these principles. Let me just say this as a sort of a final note. Our work, people ask me oftentimes, where do you start, right? What does this mean? Like, how do we institutionalize this today? Do we wait on some big thing to happen? And often I say, well, no, you start today. Right? You can take advantage of our website. There are plenty of resources there that give you a sort of a launching pad to start off exploring your own journey relative to diversity and inclusion and belonging, and think about what it means to be an upstander in some of these scenarios. There's a path that's already sort of charted there. And so that can sometimes happen on the individual level. We've also really focused on what does it look like to focus on inclusive leadership. And this is what we've said. We are going to be intentional about looking for candidates that can help us as an institution think about advancing the mission of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, because it's an organizational principle, the same way that finances are an organizational priority for us, or flexibility or organizational effectiveness or organizational priorities for us. And in doing so, we create a pathway for members of our community who want to move into leadership positions to really start thinking about what it looks like to be inclusive leaders, and helping to equip them to be able to lead diverse teams. So it's all part of the work. Allyship is one component of it, but it's just as important as thinking about any of the compositional diversity pieces and executing on any other strategy that we really need, because ultimately we are an organization that is incredibly diverse, and all of us, me included, are called on to be allies for people who are not like myself.
All right, well, time has flown by, so we have time for one more question from the audience. And this is really speaking to everyone who's here. What are some small steps that we can do each day as individuals, which will have a cumulative impact on diversity and inclusion at Harvard?
I think I'll answer this question. I'll talk about myself in my own practice. I am constantly reminded that we all have blind spots. A friend of mine said once, people are like cars. We all have blind spots, and cars have 3 mirrors, right? So we all have to identify where our blind spots are and where our growth areas are. And I try really hard to lean into that. So an example a student gave me once, which has always stuck with me, he talked about going to the Multicultural Student Center at UW-Madison and being asked, someone pulled him to the side and said, hey, can you not say you guys when you speak to us? And, that's a phrase most of us actually probably use all the time. And he talked about being offended, and he said, this is just me. I'm from the Midwest. It's Midwestern sensibility. And then he said, but I recognize, what does it cost me? Right. But there are people who are gender nonconforming. There are any number of things that might be occurring for other people. And so I will say this, we don't always have to understand why it is that someone is asking us to do things. Sometimes it is okay because it does not hurt us, and because we choose to be generous and to lead with generosity, we make space for other people. Because we leave room for the possibility that there are things that we simply don't understand. So I always try to encourage us to think about where our own blind spots may be, and to stay on the edge of your growth zone. So continuously try to push yourself to think about who is not included in the conversation, whose perspective might I benefit from. and what don't I know? And I don't know what I don't know. And so I'm constantly trying to think about how we encourage ourselves to leave room for the possibility that someone else might have that next great idea. And that means creating more room and opportunity for other people at the table. And so, I'll say this, I think we don't need allies. Sometimes we need sponsors. And so to the extent that you can help to push these ideas along and to push others along in your community, I welcome the collaboration. So thank you all. It's been a wonderful conversation, and look forward to more opportunities to engage with you in the future.
Thank you so much, Jeannie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charleston. We so appreciate your sharing your insights with us today and hope that we'll be able to get periodic updates. We wish you the best as you embark on your ambitious plans and look forward to working with you. Thank you again to the Unity co-sponsors and to everyone who joined. You'll be receiving information about how to sign up for the Unity mailing list, and we hope we'll see you at the next Unity webinar. Please know that there is so much other amazing programming happening throughout Harvard that is open to alumni on the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. On my calendar, there is a session tomorrow that a number of SIGs and clubs are co-sponsoring about the allyship between Indigenous peoples in America and the people of Ireland, a surprising and fascinating historical relationship. On March 5th, there is a great program about Asian American women in the Harvard Archives, sponsored by the Schlesinger Library. On March 9th, Radcliffe is hosting a session on Harvard's legacy of slavery. And there is so much more. If you even just Google events and Harvard alumni, you will find links to these and many more. We hope to see you. Thanks again.